This is going to be a video about how science in this country is cooked. And yeah, that means we're going to talk about politics. If you're one of those people who cry foul anytime a science communicator brings up politics, preferring your science pure and untainted, let me be the one to burst your little bubble. Money don't grow on trees, and science ain't free. And when politicians try to censor us and destroy the very institutions that make science in this country possible, not talking about it would be irresponsible and fucking cowardly. As a science communicator, it's my job not to just educate the public about the results of science, but to inform about how science itself works and functions. So yeah, we're going to talk about politics. And in case you don't know, I'm a postdoctoral researcher, I work at the University of Michigan, and I'm funded through the National Institute of Health. So everything I'm going to talk about here directly influences me and my friends and colleagues in a deeply personal way. Now, as is so often the case, it's likely not obvious to most of the American public what's going on. So this video is going to be a kind of insider scoop. I'm going to tell you what has really been happening behind the scenes. First, we should make clear that the lifeblood of science has always been what we call basic research, or sometimes fundamental research. This is what I like to think of as pure science. It is research that's guided by a desire to just understand the natural world. This is in contrast to applied science, which is research with a specific goal in mind, usually to make money, such as like improving our ability to extract and locate oil. Or it could be development of vaccines or other kinds of medical treatment. While I'm drawing this distinction between basic and applied science, it's super important to understand that applied science literally does not exist without basic science. For example, CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing technology that is being developed to treat some heritable diseases directly through gene therapy. But the CRISPR-Cas9 system is based on the natural immune system in bacteria. And so if there were never any geneticist or bacteriologist that worked out how this system works in the first place in a basic research setting, no one could have ever seen any future potential applications for this molecular pathway. The gene editing technology has since been patented and is no doubt making some folks a shit ton of money. But it took those lowly lab rats in their white coats toiling away for decades trying to explain to people why bacteria are cool actually. Keep funding us, this research is important. Even if it isn't obvious that it's relevant to humans, it took those people to first lay that groundwork so that others could make money off of it. Now, some research will literally never have any relevance to economic growth or human health. Sure, we can say, well, you never know, but let's be honest, most of it simply isn't relevant. But that's not why we do science anyway. We do it out of love for knowledge and understanding because there's something powerful and beautiful in that. That the universe has given rise to beings capable of reflecting on how they came about is remarkable. It might not be your thing, but pure science doesn't exist to make you money or improve the human condition. It's about the pursuit of knowledge, which to me is valuable in and of itself. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about who does basic research and how it's funded. In this country, academic institutions conduct about 45% of all basic research according to data from the NSF. The rest is carried out by various governmental agencies like NOAA, the Forestry Service, Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, etc. And a small fraction is carried out by private companies. So the majority of basic research in this country is done by public institutions, i.e., universities, and the state and federal government. Furthermore, federal agencies funded almost 60% of all basic science research in 2021. Here's a chart showing the trend of federal funding for basic science since 1953. The two biggest federal agencies for funding basic science research are the National Institute of Health, the NIH, and the National Science Foundation, the NSF. The NIH has a budget of $48 billion, making it the largest funder of biomedical research in the world. The NSF's budget is around $9 billion, and while these numbers may sound large, as a share of the total federal budget of $6.75 trillion, it's a fraction of a percent. The budget of these agencies is determined by Congress each year. The majority of their budget is then allocated to a series of grant opportunities. Some of these grants are very specific research projects, but most of them are what are called career grants. Career grants fund research labs instead of just a single project. And so when you apply to them, you typically have to lay out what is your research plan for many years to come and how that money is going to fund many, many projects, typically around whatever the theme of your research lab is. So let's make this concrete. The grant that I'm funded under is from the NIH. It was awarded to my boss in 2020, and it's called Maximizing Investigators Research Early Stage Investigator Award. I know that's a terrible name. It's often just shortened to MIRA. The award is $1.84 million over 5 years with a chance of renewal after 5 years. Okay, so what exactly does this money do? You might think that it goes directly to actual research, like buying equipment or something, but that's incorrect. A large chunk of it goes to hiring people to do the research. People like me, that is, it pays our salaries. A smaller fraction goes to supporting graduate students in the semesters when they may not have teaching assistantships, and then the smallest fraction of it goes to the literal research. In our case, this is divided up between computational resources, some molecular lab expenditures, but also paying open access fees at journals, as well as travel expenses to go to conferences and present that research. But a little known fact is that a sizable fraction of all grants actually go directly to the university. Researchers budget for this when they apply for the grant, and the line item is called indirect costs. You can think of these as a kind of tax on the grant itself. For example, most R1 institutions, which are those heavily devoted to research, like the University of Michigan, University of Texas, Harvard, Yale, etc., typically have indirect cost rates of upwards of 50%. This means that for every grant dollar a researcher requests, an additional 50 cents is devoted to the university. So if the rate is 50%, then the total percent of the grant that the university receives is 50 out of 150, or about 33%. While all of this might sound puzzling to you, universities do this because it's literally how they keep the lights on. Historically, state appropriations to universities was a major source of their funding, so much so that many universities in the 1960s were completely tuition free. However, states have dramatically reduced their direct funding to public institutions. Less than 10% of the budget of most major universities comes directly from the state anymore, while upwards of 40% come from overhead from research grants. This budget is then used to pay staff, but also invest in building and improving labs and research space, buying new equipment for scientists to use, and also paying instructors who will be teaching the next generation. So while it sounds evil that universities are taking so much money from the researcher, it's actually a vital part of the research economy. Researchers actually need the university they work for to continue updating and maintaining the lab space that the research is conducted in. Now, people are quick to point out that there's a lot of administrative bloat at universities and that some of the money is being wasted on that. And while this is certainly true, the reasons for it are complex, and this is not the video to dig into that. The main thing I want you to take away from this is that while there is certainly some wasteful spending at universities, what researchers want is not to cut the university budget. It's to reallocate that money to things that we think are more important. So overhead itself is not what we're trying to get cut. It's not the problem. In addition to funding established research labs, the NIH and the NSF also fund early career scientists like graduate students and postdocs, and these two groups tend to have the most unstable jobs. Graduate students rely on teaching or research fellowships to pay the bills. At some universities, teaching fellowships are scarce, and so professors have to cover grad students' expenses through their research grants. Grad students tend to get paid extremely poorly for the amount of work that they do. They often have to wear many hats. They are students, but they are also teachers and researchers. They also mentor undergraduates in research projects, and so kind of play the role of PI, and often will find themselves managing the day-to-day runnings of the lab itself. A prestigious source of income for graduate students is the NSF's Graduate Research Fellowship, or the GRFP. This is a competitive fellowship that helps fund graduate students as they conduct their research. Many also apply to the NSF Postdoctoral Research Fellowship, which in biology is the PRFB, which funds recent PhD recipients for up to 3 years to continue getting training and working in a lab as a postdoc. This is also an extremely prestigious and competitive fellowship that provides a good living stipend. While there are private sources of funding for basic science, there are much fewer of them. This makes them both highly competitive and, frankly, incapable of being a reliable source of funding for the vast majority of scientists. If there were no public funding of science, the private sector simply could not keep up. Nor would they likely want to. As I've already said, most basic research is not profitable. Okay, with that really quick and dirty rundown of the funding structure of academia, if you want to know more, check out the links in the description. Let's talk about how it's all being systematically dismantled and the chilling effect it's going to have on the future, or lack thereof, of research in this country. First, we should note that government agencies, which I pointed out earlier, do a ton of basic research themselves in addition to providing funding for it, have been completely ransacked by the Trump administration. In particular, by Elon Musk and his band of incel tech bros at Doge. It began the literal day Trump took office, under the guise that agencies like the CDC, NIH, and NSF were promoting gender ideology and the woke DEI agenda. A massive funding freeze on these agencies was put into effect as Musk's team set out to sweep through every grant and purge any that might reference DEI. A list of words was shared around on Blue Sky that if they appear in your grant, it will be flagged for review. They include everything from diversity and inclusion to female. Not male, mind you. It's okay if you wrote the word male in your grant, but if you used the word female, well, buddy, you're part of the woke agenda. Well, this is fucking idiotic enough. The freeze itself screws over basically every graduate student that applied for the NSF postdoctoral fellowships. The reason for this is that the panels that were set to review these fellowships in January were all canceled. In fact, the fellowships themselves have technically been archived. We're not even sure if they're going to exist going forward. While there are some indications that the review panels will start meeting again, it won't be till mid-February, and it's not even clear which panels are meeting and which aren't. In the past, applicants wouldn't hear whether or not they received the fellowship until April. The norm is to graduate in May or early June, so the time frame is pretty tight. Once you graduate, you don't have a job anymore. This delay in the review process means that they won't be able to even announce recipients until well into the fall, and that's way too late for people. Landlords don't typically accept, well, I'm waiting for Elon Musk to decide whether or not he's going to let this fellowship exist, but surely we'll know soon, as a form of rent payment. Because of this, many of those deciding between other jobs will have to just abandon this prestigious fellowship or risk being homeless. And let me tell you, people spend months writing and putting together these applications. It's a shit ton of work to construct this proposal. It's an absolute travesty that these people are going to be denied a chance at this fellowship for no other reason than Trump is a racist piece of shit and Elon Musk is an incompetent blowhard. And if you think I'm going too far for calling them racist, you should know that the NIH has already canceled grant applicants who applied through their diversity program. It's not that these grants were about diversity per se, they are doing the same exact research as all the other programs. It was just a call specifically to promote the work of underrepresented groups in STEM. Now, they could have just tossed them into the pile with the rest of the white male applicants who didn't apply to the diversity call, just remove the diversity heading. But instead of doing that, they just outright canceled them. That means that all of those people don't get their research considered for the simple fact that they are minorities. I don't know what else you call that other than racism. But review panels have not just been paused for fellowships. They are being paused for all grant renewals to give Musk's team a chance to review them. Let me make this clear to you. What is happening right now is an unprecedented invasion of science by politicians who are only going to let through what they deem acceptable to their political ideology. This is playing out in the clearest right now at the CDC. Trump appointees there have decided to found a new scientific medical journal that will be a place for free speech. In practice, the founders are vaccine denialists who have railed against mask mandates and the general response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, they have taken over direct control of the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, the MMWR, which has been independently operated by the CDC since its founding, so that they can stall reports of the spread of bird flu in the US because the Trump team is worried that that makes them look bad. As I said before, the grant that I'm funded under can be renewed after 5 years. This year happens to be the year we apply for renewal, which means the funding freeze and panel cancellations pushes back that process by some unknown time. Again, this creates a lapse in funding. Even if panels resume and grants get pushed through, this freeze has people scrambling to figure out how to comply with the onslaught of executive orders. This is going to cost potentially thousands of people their jobs. While postdocs are obviously fucked, this extends to prospective grad students as well. The University of Michigan, for example, requires that professors pay a portion of their graduate student stipend. If the professor doesn't get grants, they can't pay the stipend, and so they can't take graduate students. That means that all undergrads looking to continue doing research and get their PhDs and go on to be scientists are more likely to struggle to find funded positions and may end up having to leave science altogether. So direct funding via grants from these agencies is in total limbo, which even if the faucet gets turned back on, will have already caused irreparable damage to the scientific community. But these agencies themselves are under attack. The Office of Personnel Management, the OPM, has already informed the NSF to lay off around half of its employees, and there are rumblings that it may be facing a cut of up to 2/3 of its $9 billion budget. In anticipation of this massive cut, the NSF has already begun archiving many of its research initiatives, as well as removing all references to renewal possibilities from their website. Musk staffers have also raided NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a major source of research into, you guessed it, climate change, as well as manages U.S. fisheries. The Guardian reported, quote, "They apparently just sort of walked past security and said, 'Get out of my way,' and they're looking for access for the IT systems, as they have in other agencies," said Andrew Rosenberg, a former NOAA official who is now a fellow at the University of New Hampshire. They will have access to the entire computer system, a lot of which is confidential information. Project 2025, written by several former Trump staffers, has called for the agency to be broken up and downsized, claiming the agency is harmful to U.S. prosperity for its role in climate science. All of this is frightening and damaging enough, but perhaps the move that will be the most crippling for academia. Again, remembering that academic institutions represent almost 50% of basic research, was the announcement on February 7th, 2025, that the NIH would cap indirect costs at 15%. This means that universities can take a maximum of 15% of the grant money awarded to individual researchers. Please understand when I tell you that the impact of this will be catastrophic. Universities cannot afford an up to 75% cut from one of their most important sources of revenue. And this is not something that's being proposed. It went into effect immediately. This means that universities will need to make deep, massive cuts across the board, which will absolutely include funding for research, but also investment into undergraduate and graduate education. It will mean fewer teaching assistantships for grad students, fewer research training and experience opportunities for undergrads. It will cause a freeze on hiring as well as layoffs, which will disproportionately impact early career scientists who don't have tenure yet, and so much more that we can't even begin to try to speculate on. This outcome is not something they're doing out of the blue. Every action they've taken was spelled out in Project 2025. Including capping the indirect cost, cutting the NIH and NSF budgets, dismantling the Department of Education, etc. None of this was a secret. They're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. So if you voted for Trump, then you have no excuse. You knew what was going to happen. And if you didn't know, it's because of your own fucking idiocy. If academia and scientific research survives this, it will be a shadow of its former self. Research will be under direct control and supervision of politicians. Any research that undermines the administration will be suppressed, exactly as it is currently being done at the CDC. That's just the beginning. Any research that is not deemed profitable will cease to exist as unqualified tech bros turn over all grant funding decisions to fucking AI. And thousands upon thousands of people from all backgrounds and walks of life who dreamed of being scientists one day will be denied the opportunity because they were born in a country who cares more about profit and loyalty to a populist demagogue than they do about knowledge, education, and curiosity. I want to end this with a request. If you can, please write or call your representative. Tell them that you support the NIH and the NSF and that they must fight against the encroachment of politics into science. That the United States has been a world leader in science for half a century, and that the actions of DOGE and the Trump administration will absolutely cripple, if not downright bring about the end of science in America. Please. It's the least we can do. If science is at an end in this country, let's at least not let it die quietly.